Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for our third Thursday virtual program. My name is Lauren Burnham, and I'm the Assistant Director here at the American Swedish Historical Museum. And we're thrilled to bring you this year-long series of virtual tours to mark the museum's 100th anniversary this year. Our goal is to provide virtual learning opportunities to celebrate the centennial with our long-distance community. Today, we are honored to facilitate the presentation of a very special project between Amy Grant at the historic Gloria Dei Preservation Corporation and Todd Compton and team at Colliers Engineering and Design in an effort to find the grave of Swedish colonist Peter Rambo. A few housekeeping things before we get started today. The lecture is being recorded and will be made available publicly on the American Swedish Historical Museum's YouTube page in the coming week. We ask that everyone please keep yourself on mute during the talk just to minimize any background noise. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to enter those into chat and we'll read them aloud at the end. Or you can also opt to unmute yourself at the end and ask a question live. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Todd to introduce us to the project and his involvement. Todd?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being on. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. And when Lauren came to us about potentially doing this, they wanted to talk about the ground penetrating radar and all. I said, I'll talk, but I want Alex Ross on here. He runs the geophysical group, which has ground penetrating radar in it for the company. And so I wanted him to talk more about the specifics of that. But I wanted to just kind of tell my story about how I got to the point where we found the remains. I've used this term. Well, I told Lauren again today. I said I've used this term over and over again. It's been completely serendipitous. I do a lot of genealogy in my family, and I have older family members who did the heavy lifting for me on a lot of my family trees. But I can take most of my lines back, into the 1400s, due to some really great record keeping in Europe. And I knew about Peter. I knew this track of my family. And I knew Peter was called the Father New Sweden. I knew the backstory, a lot of his story. But getting to Philadelphia in my old capacity, what I was doing, I was going to get there at some point in time. Well, I worked for a company that ended up being purchased by Colliers Engineering and Design. And in 2020, mid 2023, I took over the geo-environmental division for the company, the national division. And so I ended up being in Philadelphia for meetings, and I was heading over to Mount Laurel, New Jersey. I decided to make a stop. I was with somebody that I worked with, and I decided to make a stop over to the church. And I told him, I said, "Hey, do me a favor before we go over the Ben Franklin Bridge. Hang a ride. I want to go down. I want to go down and say hello to some family." And so we maneuvered down. I didn't tell him what I was doing. And we got to the church. He said, "You're going to go see family at the church?" And I said, "Oh, they're buried here." And he goes, "Who's buried here?" I go, "Well, my 10th great grandfather, who's called the Father New Sweden's buried here." I said, "I'd like to go see his grave." And kind of blew his mind. I walked around the cemetery, and I looked and looked, didn't find a map or anything. And I couldn't find him, and I was a little bummed, but I was like, well, I've been here at least. I can at least say I've been to the Gloria Dei Swedes. I've been to where, the ground where he's buried. And as we were leaving, I do owe it to him because we were driving out, and he said, "You should ask that lady right there." And there was a lady tending one of the gardens on the sites of Gloria Dei Swedes. And I wouldn't have done it if he didn't tell me, if he hadn't kind of forced the issue. So I got out and told her who I was and what I was doing. I said, "I don't know if you have any connection to the church, but I'm trying to find a certain grave out there." And she asked who I was looking for. And I said, "Peter Rambo." And she said, "Why are you looking for Peter?" And I said, "Well, he's my 10th great grandfather." So she took me right into the church. I met the preacher and the church secretary. We hung out for about an hour, left the guy I was with in the car for an hour, forgot he was even there. And we made all these connections. I bought the whole historical 10-volume series, I think it is, of the Swede, of the new Swedes in America, and went about my way. I was like, okay, well, because they told me, "We think we know where he is, but we don't know exactly. We think he's right here by the vestibule. It's what your family's always said." And just kind of left it at that. And I would say about 3 or 4 months later, I got an email. I got a message from, or actually a letter from Amy Grant, who runs the historical preservation group there at Gloria Dei, and she and I had exchanged a bunch of emails and things, and and I saw the email. I read the letter, and I didn't get halfway through it. She said, "We're trying to raise money to find Andrew Suplee and Peter Rambo, and we're looking for family members to donate money for something called ground penetrating radar." That's as far as I got in the letter. I've never even finished the letter. I immediately picked up the phone and called her, and I said, "Do you remember me?" And she said, "Yeah." And I go, "This story gets crazier." I said, "I told you I work for an engineering company, but I'm the national division director for the Jew Environmental Group. I said, you want to do GPR? I got GPR over in Mount Laurel." I said, "Save your money. We'll just come do it." I said, "Let's try to find him." So we scheduled a date to come back, and we did that in September of so we February of 2024 is when I first was at the church. September of 2024 is when Alex and his team came out, and Mary-Lise Beveridge was on the call. Mary-Lise was there with us, and it was just it was a really neat moment. We were kind of going all over the place. I was in the catacombs under the church, trying to figure out if is he under this vestibule. Could he be in a crypt, because some of the Lutheran ministers are in the crypts down there. And Alex came down, and I told Alex, I said, "Hey, look, he's not under here." I tapped my hand on the wall. I said, "If he's anywhere, he's on the other side of this wall, on the other, on the other side of this wall for the catacomb." And about 10 minutes later, he came back. Popped his head down on the stairwell and said, "Hey, I got something for you to see." And I walked up, and everybody was kind of there, kind of lined up. And he said, "You want to go say hello?" And he had flagged out where the remains were found. And it was a moment, basically kind of tying 400 years of my family together. And I was more emotionally taken back by it than I thought I was going to be. And everybody kind of left me, and I was able to walk over there, and I stuck my hand as far as I could into the dirt, because Alex, like, he's only about 3 feet deep. And I talked to him for about 3 or 4 minutes and told him how important he was. You're still, you matter to us. Your family loves you. You still matter. And it's like the old Pharaonic saying, "Speak my name and I'll live forever." I truly believe in that, and I try to keep my ancestors alive by honoring them through genealogy and things like this. And so it was been to say it was serendipitous is an understatement. It has been an amazing journey, and I've grown a lot of family out of it. Cynthia Temple was the director that was out tending the garden. Cynthia's like family. Jeanette, that's a director's like family. Amy's like family. I came back for the 325th worship service, and I took the Eucharist at the same place that my ninth great grandfather did, to the day, 325 years apart. And so it has become something very, very, I'm very connected to it now. My dad played for the Phillies, so it's another weird thing that my dad used to play at Old Connie Mack Stadium in Philadelphia, and we lived over in Cherry Hill. And so it's this weird, all these weird connections to this, but Philadelphia is as much home to me as anything because of this, because of this connection. And I couldn't be happier to be here to tell that story. It's an amazing thing. I don't believe in happenstance. I don't believe in, I don't believe in coincidences. I think all that happened for a reason. I think we're all on this call for a reason. So it was just meant to be. And it has, like I said, it has been an amazing journey. One I hope we will continue. Alex, I'll let Alex speak here in just a second. One of the things that I wanted to do with the church, I said, we can do the GPR. We can bring in our GIS, Geographic Information Systems people. We can do a lot of things for the church, and that we can do a lot of training here, and saves money for the church. They got a grant to redo the roof, which is in dire need of repair. So we're saving money this way. I'm going to try to get our survey group over in Mount Laurel to come over and start doing 3D scanning inside and outside the church, also of the graveyard. We've continued. We did build an interactive mapping system for the church, for the graveyard, that ties in Alex's GPR data in with our GIS system that we created. That was unveiled at the 325th anniversary of the first service. So it just continues to grow. We're going to continue to be out there doing training, continuing to explore the grounds. The orphan graves that are off to the side, that's something I really want. I would like markers there. I know we'll never know who's there, but I think it's important that people know that there are people buried there. I hate to think that they're over there with no markers. So that's something personally I would like to see done. But it's been a good thing. And there's a video that Mary-Lise and her team, Mary-Lise won a national award for her article she wrote about this journey. and they did a video of me. And at the end of the video, I said, "There's a lot of good that comes out of finding Peter." And it has been nothing but good. I mean, it has just continued, all parties involved. It has just been a win-win across the board, and I couldn't be happier. So that's my journey. That's my story. I don't. It's stranger than fiction how all this came together. I'm from West Texas. The family migrated down from Pennsylvania into South Carolina into Arkansas, came into Texas in the mid to late 1800s, way out in as far away from you could get from Philadelphia. It's out in the desert in West Texas, and that's where my Rambos are buried out there. That's where I come from. So it's the journey from Ramberget, Sweden, all the way to west of Abilene, Texas, is quite the journey for one family to do in 400 years. So I'm proud who I come from, and I'm proud to have been a part of all this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex. Thank you very much.
Well, that's quite an intro. I don't know if I can even top that, but I'll try. Hello, everybody. Alex Ross. I'm the division director for geophysics and hydrogeology at CD, and been with the firm for about 14 years, and have been in the field for about 22 years. Background is typically geophysics and geology, and how it relates to groundwater, but it's evolved over the years into projects serving archaeology, serving engineering things, doing work for contamination, doing this, that. So we give kind of our hand in a little bit of everything. And with experience, we kind of apply it to all these other different projects, including this one. As Todd said, this was a really wonderful opportunity for us to say, let's take a look at the residents here, and let's evaluate conditions. Let's see what we can find historically, and treat this as a training ground, treat this as an opportunity for newer staff who I'm hiring to cross the river, come on over, and let's evaluate a small area, their own little plot, and let's keep on building that and kind of developing that. And so with that in mind, and we first did this small one where we kind of chose 3 areas, which we'll talk about. But it was very challenging when we got on site, and all these people are looking at all this stuff and asking questions. And here we are trying to do our work, and everybody's like, "Well, what about this? Let's go over here. What about this? And let's go over here." And it's like, whoa, okay, this is a lot. We got a lot of exciting things here, but it just tells us there's a lot of work to be done here, which is great. So with that in mind, let's go back here to our involvement. As Todd discussed a little bit, the idea and the purpose of this was twofold. One is to evaluate this site. What can we bring to the table historically? And two, shameless plug, is that CD wants to show off what our capabilities are. We want to show off what we can do, and this is a great opportunity to do it. So what we did is we started off with a prototype evaluation. We took a couple different areas and did some small surveys and proof of concept that we were comfortable with the data sets, that we can create a deliverable that shows off some features, and kind of also in real time with Amy and the group who were there. Hey, we think we see this. This is what we non-biasedly think is going on. And then they would say, oh yeah, of course, that's X, Y, Z. That gels up, that lines up, correlates. That's great. Ultimately, this is supposed to be a non-invasive evaluation. Geophysics is thrown around in a lot of different terms, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But ultimately, it's non-invasive. We have a tool or tools that allow us to look at the subsurface and look at the history without disturbing it, which is it's phenomenal. And this is also something that didn't take 10 years. So this is something we did in a day, Todd, right? And we got some really excellent results in a very short period of time. So we also later on integrated some work with GIS, or Geographic Information Systems. We'll talk a little bit about that too. But the end goal result is to evaluate the entire cemetery, tie in data that we find geophysically, tie that into the GIS data. There's an app we'll talk about, but put all this stuff in one basket and let people explore it. Let the novices explore it. Let people who are just curious explore it. This doesn't need to be a high level, even this talk, a lecture about the dielectric constants of geophysics and all this stuff. The goal is to make this realistic for everybody, and it's tangible. So that in mind, geophysics, like I said, it's non-invasive. Typically, the idea is that we use a whole slew of tools to evaluate the subsurface, whether it be maybe the first 10 feet, maybe it's the first 500 feet, depending on what we're looking for. And just a taste of things that we typically do. Archaeology, of course, is the focus here. Is identifying maybe buried remains, culture remains, foundations, forts and otherwise, structures. We do a lot of environmental work. So that's buried tanks, contamination plumes. Geologic mapping, where we're looking at where is bedrock, how deep is bedrock, are there sinkholes, like in karst and cavity detection. You probably seen in the news many times the sinkholes pop up here and there, and usually we're the ones deployed to go try to figure out how big it is and then how to fix it and remediate it. Infrastructure, of course, like Philadelphia, we do a lot of work in the city where we're evaluating foundations and construction and how we can build better, stronger, better, wonderful. And then hydrogeology. So that is interaction with water. Maybe it's contamination, maybe it's flow paths, maybe it's a water supply, and we need to find a location where we can put a well. So all of these things are, like I said, design non-invasive. I keep saying that non-invasive, non-invasive, but the goal is to use our efforts as a tool to evaluate an area and then surgically kind of approach these areas and say, this is where we want to focus. In the case of archaeology, hey, we think we found some indication of buried remains. Let's go focus on that. And then let's bring an archaeologist in and maybe evaluate what we want to do next. And instead of someone out there with a backhoe digging the whole site, that's crazy. Now we can say maybe someone's out there with, a little hand shovel and is poking around, and we're not disturbing the whole site. We're focusing our efforts on what we think is important. So with geophysics, in this case, we did two methods. There's me walking up above, and there's my buddy Josh below. We did electromagnetic induction, and we did ground penetrating radar. Very briefly, electromagnetic induction is essentially you're generating kind of a field, and as you walk around, that field interacts with other stuff, and how that field reacts with my equipment, then we can look at this and say, this is a conductive feature like a piece of buried metal. This is some soil that's been disturbed, and it appears more like it might be cultural remains or a foundation, etc. With GPR, you see the gentleman at the bottom, it's Josh with the GPR cart. And that's just where you're walking around. It's not a lawnmower, by the way. Everybody thinks it's a lawnmower. Is you're walking around and you're actually generating this field. You're kind of creating a sonar reflection that bounces off things, and then we can see the response and then start gauging what we think is in the context of the site. So we're going to talk a little bit more about GPR and less the EM, but I have some cool slides at the end we can talk about if you're interested. But GPR is essentially, as I said, not a lawnmower, but is a tool that has an antenna, and it's broadcasting a signal into the ground. It's kind of just pinging off of everything, reflecting and bouncing off of all this stuff. The way that the signal gets bounced, reflected, refracted, and comes back up to the unit is how we can differentiate between soil layers, maybe buried objects, pipes. We use this very often for identifying underground utilities. Foundations as well. Maybe it's more a modern foundation, like something concrete, or in many cases, if it's old timber and there's still some remnant timber structure foundation, we can often see that. The result is in the upper right, you can see kind of just an example, a GPR screen. If you come out to the site the next time we do this, or if you want to discuss it more, if you look at the screen that we're actually looking as we're plugged in, you're going to say, Alex, that is the weirdest thing in the world. It's just a bunch of scribbles. How are you making any sense of this? It's part of it is muscle memory and understanding the nuances and the context of the site, but also is taking this data and then post-processing and analyzing it, cleaning it up, filtering it so that we can get the best signal possible. And ultimately, we call these signals or reflections are anomalies, changes from the material around it. And in the context of the site, in this case, a historical site and cemetery, we're looking at those changes in materials and say, okay, well, this is about the size, approximation, and depth of maybe a buried grave, or buried cultural remains. This looks like a potential timber foundation. So using that context, we kind of put our spin on what we think is going on. Ultimately, we try to create these cross-section profiles, and then usually a map that says here, 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 here's the stuff we're interested in. Okay. So in this case here, just this aerial shot showing just kind of the footprint area. What we did is we started developing a grid system. We knew that we were going to come back and do this for years to come. So we started developing an area in 3 spots we'll talk about in a minute, but ultimately collecting GPS data, collecting measurements off of buildings, collecting reference areas that we're going to start collecting EM and GPR, and then take each one of those puzzle pieces and keep filling them in over the years. And then we were going to have a fully comprised site and would say, here are all the cultural remains. Do they match up with the headstones? Do they match up with other information that we think we've lost in time, and maybe there's someone here? And then maybe some other things too, like foundations and maybe just buried stuff in general that we're interested in that has historical significance. All right, cool. So with that, we initially talked to Todd and said, we're going to look at this one area for Peter Rambo. And Amy, when she presented this proposal to us from an archaeological firm, they were talking about this area 1, saying, we understand that you have a plot here, and we'll see if anybody's there. So that was area 1 with this Andrew plot, family plot. And then 2, we started, as we're walking around, people are talking about, well, what about this blockhouse? There's a blockhouse. There's a foundation out here. Go over there and check it out. So then we were kind of getting pulled over here and looking at this other stuff too. And then, of course, area 3 is the family, Rambo family, and potentially Peter Rambo. So we're going to talk about each of these areas individually, what we did, what we found, and how we're going to build on this stuff. So area 1, as I said, this is just an open plot. You can see an area I've outlined in yellow, and this has been presumed Andrew Suplee grave. They think it was a family plot. The headstone's been lost over time. Sometime, I think, in the early 1900s or late 1800s, the headstone kind of disappeared. For a Gloria Dei church leader in 1719. So he's been around a while, and as I said, the gravestone is missing. So there was some indication that maybe there had been other family members buried, adjacent, and can we differentiate between the different plots, or is there even anything there? Maybe not. So we conducted some ground penetrating radar, and we actually found the results of what we suspect to be a minimum of 4 distinct anomalies. So as you can see here in the photo, the slide, as I mentioned, GPR, kind of these profiles that kind of look like squiggle lines. Essentially what we're looking for are hyperbola shapes. So kind of an inverted hill shape. As we walk over an object, as we get closer to it, the energy gets stronger and the reflection creates this kind of peak shape. So what we're looking for initially is a bunch of these peak shapes and other features that might indicate the structure of a grave by vertical walls, and also if there's cultural remains, whether that be the coffin, whether that be the disturbed soils over time, if the coffin's older, but what kind of stuff are we seeing? So in this case, even though the area is kind of tight, we're kind of doing these diagonal lines and smaller lines and moving around. You can see in the photo we have lots and lots of pin flags. All these pin flags are features that we identified as suspected cultural remains. So this is good because a lot of the pin flags you see off in the distance, well, they match the headstones. Great, and that's proof of concept. It starts to line everything up. It also shows us that our equipment is making sense with the site and the soil characteristics. That's good. And in the area in question here, we found 4 distinct anomalies. The first thing, Josh here, who was collecting the data, you see in the photo, he was newer at the time. He's like, it seems kind of strange. There's multiple layers here. Is that just dirt material that's been poured in over time, or is that maybe potentially more than one person? And in my experience, that actually suggests there could be other people here, and maybe there's multiple residents sharing this plot. And we went over to Amy and said, "Hey, Amy, this is our data. This is what we're seeing. We're kind of seeing these 4 features, and they're all within this burial area. Is it possible that they could be multiple people and family members in this plot?" And she said, "Yeah, of course. We actually have a lot of history documents that say, in fact, that's exactly what we think is going on. But we didn't want to tell you because we didn't want to bias you, and let you know the secret." Okay, cool. So looking at the data, we are pretty confident that there's a minimum of 4 residents. It might be Gertrude. It might be I think there's 4 or 5 of the children who are also buried. We suspect that at least several members have been sharing this plot with Suplee. And it gels with the historical data. It gels with the fact that we have some indication where the headstone used to be. And more importantly, if you're looking at this photo, you can see all of the nice regimented alignment of all the headstones. And obviously a big gap where there's no headstone, chances are there's probably someone or some people there. By doing this method and evaluating it, we put the pin flags in, we measured off and said, okay, we are confident here, here, and here are these family members. And we were very confident it's probably the Suplee family. So, we kind of closed the book a little bit on, a very open question. And, at the same time, this gave us a ton of experience for Josh just to get his feet wet and understand the world is not perfect with GPR. I'll say this is my disclaimer. If you've ever heard the word GPR, you've seen it on TV, on the internet, everybody says that, CSI, I remember everybody comes up to me and says, well, if you're looking at GPR, you can see the body down there. You can see, there was a 42-year-old male, and he had an injury on his right femur, and he has a Bowie knife in his right hand. No, that's not how this works. That's all sci-fi. The realism is you're looking at this profile, and kind of like I said, these squiggles and these refractions, and we have to try to figure out these refractions, how they relate to the context of the site. And this is obviously a cemetery. These features align with the potential for being buried remains. One thing I'll note too is if you're looking at this profile and you'll say, well, geez, these seem pretty shallow. On the left side you have our estimated depth, and some of these are wow, like a foot, 2 feet. That seems very shallow. Well, two things. One is it's our experience that we typically see older, pre-18th century and maybe some early 19th century cultural remains and graves are a little bit shallower. And two is we are very, very close to Delaware, and we suspect that the water table is very shallow here, and it would make a lot of sense that they obviously just couldn't dig that deep. Proof of concept, we evaluated a whole bunch of these other locations, and all of them seem to gel with being about that same depth. So it argues that, furthermore, that these are anomalies that we think are remains, and also that water table probably had a factor here. Okay. Area 2. Former blockhouse. I know, Todd, you were very excited about this one, talking about the blockhouse and where's the blockhouse, and there's been a lot of controversy probably about this one. And I will say this is a to be continued story, but we have some initial data. So we are connecting some geophysical data here. Josh is using the GPR unit, kind of in the back area. So this would be the south east portion of the property. And if I go back just to show you real quick. Whoops, don't go the wrong way. I want to see how exciting I'm now. So we are talking about area 2. So south of the older section of the building. Okay. So we conducted we conducted some geophysical surveying over these areas of the headstone, over this cobblestone walkway, and we actually found some utilities that we said, great, we can measure the depth of utilities, we can run over the utilities and kind of calibrate our systems and make sure that our depths look good. But ultimately, this blockhouse in question was the former original settlers, log blockhouse before the church, and everybody suspects it's probably in the same footprint as the church and maybe offset slightly. It's a big unknown. Being that early 1600s, late 1600s, there's not going to be a lot left in terms of the infrastructure. So we're evaluating this, trying to see, can we find any of the old timbers? Is there any indication of foundations? So with that in mind, we did a couple things, and you'll see here's the south side of the church entrance there. And we're walking over this area where there's a utility. As I said, we're kind of calibrating and making sure our depth measurements make sense. And as we're going back and forth in this area over the cobblestone hardscape, we started picking up features that resemble the foundation. Now, once again, with a GPR profile here, you can see the area circled in blue, and you kind of see these yellow circles. Each one of those yellow circles indicates a independent individual reflection that has a signature that it appears to be non-metal and certainly not concrete. So the fact that it creates a horizontal feature, the depth seems to gel a little bit with maybe where we have a foundation. The location seems to gel a bit. We're suspecting that we may have caught just the edge of probably what we expect to be the blockhouse foundation. So whether those are existing timbers or if that was a sort of like just a general base layer that was excavated and cleaned out and the log set on top of it, we're pretty confident that we've at least caught the corner of it. There's also a feature here, we have in the dashed red, is an unknown. It's a bit deeper. It looks a little bit closer to where we'd expect to see possibly cultural remains. While it seems to be fairly faint and almost perfectly underneath that, what we suspect to be the foundation, it is very possible that we may have another resident here that we will try to delineate and evaluate if we can get some, a name to it and maybe close another chapter. So the goal for this one, though, is we definitely want to go back to this area, and visit 2 is going to be including some electromagnetic EM soil connectivity mapping and really tie this area down with the reference points, and also tie into our LiDAR survey we expect to do, and see if we can start creating kind of a 3D map of where we think this stuff is, so we can zoom out and say, well, does this make sense overall with the original layout? How does it tie into the building that's there now? Okay, here we go. This is Todd stuff here. This is the most important run, right? Now we're talking about the Rambo family. So there's a lot of controversy on where some of these graves were placed, where they are now. Some of the headstones have broken off over time, and they just kind of been moved back where we think they were. And of course, a lot of these headstones are old enough now, being limestone or marble, you can't even recognize the engravings anymore, which we'll talk about a little bit later about maybe some options for that too. So this is also kind of the southern area of the church here. And so now we're talking about area 3. And what we did with the geophysicals, you can see we kind of laid out some measuring tapes and kind of created a localized grid. And we surveyed every square inch we possibly could with this area. Given the fact that we have a lot of markers already, some of the markers, in fact, were actually kind of buried in the trees here. And then you see the larger tree and then the small bush, let's say rhododendron. There are headstones buried underneath there as well. So collecting all this data, we kind of put together this conceptual map of how we could collect data, where we could see the existing remains, and where we may have some other evidence of other remains. So in this case here, if we're looking at this image, to the far right, you'll see the taller tree, and behind this tree and between the tree and the building is where we have Todd, and where we think we have found Peter Rambo. So in this case here, we collected some GPR over this area, and you see this image here. We kind of highlighted it just to show the significance of the anomaly, but ultimately it's a GPR feature. It gels with the locations where we expect to see the remains. We see evidence of a very rough hand dug cavity, which is likely the grave, and it's also adjacent to several other headstones that had fallen over and looked like they were younger children. So in the terms of proximity, size, and GPR reflection, it all kind of ties in that this is a very, very likely location for Peter Rambo. One of the things that people probably ask is, well, what about tree roots and what about foundations and other things? And yeah, we absolutely did see some of this stuff. You could see, probably argue, some of the small little dot bullseye features that you're seeing in the profile are indications of rocks, of roots, but the area we've circled in yellow shows a very significant bright anomaly with the size dimension that we would expect to see when we would cross over cultural remains. So it gave Todd a moment to kind of have a chat with family, visit, a very old resident of the cemetery. And we've discussed back and forth with possibly a PhD student getting access to, maybe do some digging, and possibly if we can find some remnant bone, do some DNA sampling as well, with permission with everybody in the family. And really get a good confirmation on who this is and the history and the timeline. And and unfortunately, he's kind of hiding back in the corner here behind a tree. So, we would also like to see what we can do about a headstone and a marker and make sure that he's recognized. And I know I've gone through a lot of stuff here with his GPR files, and the files are kind of squiggly, and you say, well, gee, I don't know about that. I'm going to show you some other images too that are more modern, so you'll get a flavor of how GPR is seen with some of these cemetery sites. But as we're moving forward with this project, the goal is that like I said, we want to treat this as a training facility, and it's a free opportunity for us to get some training. It's a free opportunity for everyone involved that now we can get more pieces of the puzzle, like I said, and kind of evaluate the site and see who else is here. So we're working with GIS right now with our teams and also some students, so we can develop an interactive mapping program that people can also on their own leisure evaluate the site and see my data sets and say, okay, scratch my head, that's an interesting feature. What does that mean? And do I think that lines up? And oh yeah, that could be cultural remains. Interesting. We're also trying to look at this from a historical sense too, and then what else we can bring to the table, not only from documentation and other information is can we evaluate areas and say we found something here and nobody has a clue what it is? Can we determine whether that might be something of historical significance based upon some of the data and the documentations available? While this is obviously a cemetery, and we've got a lot of residents here that we're trying to evaluate and find, what else could be here? Possibly more information about the log blockhouse, possibly other information or other features that are lost in time. And with that, I guess I'll introduce that there's already an existing app that we can set up a link for later if you're interested. It allows you to not only map the site, look at everything, look at all the historical significance of every single person there that they have information for. It also allows you to search. So if you have a family member, you can type in their name, the last name. It'll show you where they are, some photos. And the goal is also, as we kind of keep this animal going, is that we're going to have GPR data, we're going to have EM data, and so you can actually see cross sections of like, well, where the family is and what evidence is showing that. And I think that's really important for everybody, get a tie back to their family. And when you just see a headstone, you see a headstone. But if we can get some geophysical data and other information that ties this down, you actually see this cross section and say, there they are. It's pretty significant. Bucket lists and other things we want to do. LiDAR, Todd talked a little bit about initially, is mapping scanning, three-dimensional scanning. That's what you see in this image here. But the idea is that we can walk around and collect all of this data and see the architecture. We can tie everything down. We can see all the headstones. We can see everything in this kind of map system. And one thing that we're very interested in trying to do as well, for some of the headstones that are very, very difficult to read now, we can actually apply LiDAR to the headstones in very high detail. And with some analysis and filtering, you can actually start extracting out some of that image, and you can actually start seeing the engravings. And the goal is that this could be a very nice PhD project for someone to evaluate with LiDAR and then start getting names back on some of these headstones that have been lost in time. There's also one other thing that we've talked about earlier. You mentioned the orphan graves. We absolutely want to evaluate this area, but I am more interested and very excited about hearing about a Gatling gun, a military Gatling that might be buried on site. As soon as Amy said that we were on site, I think Josh, who was former military, lit up and was like, "We need to go now. We need to go find it now." And I was like, "Well, we've got step 1 to do, but step 2 and 3 we'll definitely hit it." But that would be very exciting to also maybe find that some information that shows that they might be buried here. Exhuming it and everything else, that's a whole different story, but at least we can point to it and say, aha, here we are. That'd be pretty cool. I just want to say thank you to everybody on this opportunity. This is an ongoing project, and this is just the very, very tip of evaluating this site. And we've only just scratched the surface. We only have very preliminary data. But the goal is to come back time and time again and keep on, feeding this evolution of all this historical data, using more geophysical methods. GPR and EM are 2 things. We have a whole tool belt full of all different tools and things we can use. We're trying to con in our survey people and say, come on board, come on down, and you can do some surveying and LiDAR. All these things that we can do to help this site of such a huge historical significance, and at the same time, it's a learning and practice tool for us. That's a win-win. So with that, I'm going to open up to questions because I want to have tons of questions. I don't want this to be a lecture, but before I do that, I'm going to jump up to a couple more slides because I think it's important for you guys just to have a little more taste on the more modernity of geophysics with the GPR, just so you can see what we're talking about. So I threw in a couple of slides here. One of these is me back in the day riding a ATV, and we're looking for sinkholes. And so it's just a very good example of kind of these anomaly features. In this case, these kind of sloping downward features that show where Earth is actually starting to slump down. And it's a sinkhole for this, I think, was a warehouse site. But you can see on the left, very, very prominent bright features. And then on the right, you can see just a good example of how we're detecting these features. So like I said, we have kind of this bow tie transmitter. We have this bow tie feature is the receiver. We bounce the signal off these features. In this case, maybe a pipe. And you get that hyperbola shape, which you see in that profile. And that's what we're going to mark out and say, aha, we found something here. A modern, typical 20th century grave. Sorry, it's a little fuzzy, but this is more often what we're going to see is you'll see these vertical dashed lines that we have marked out, and each one of those is a mapped, cultural remains, a grave that we found. And funny enough, even though this was early 1900s, I think it was like 1905. 1930s, even these show that the remains are actually pretty shallow. Some of these, are 2 to 3 feet, which is pretty surprising. And we were doing this work for an engineering project, and we're trying to just help this engineering firm ensure that nothing is going to get disturbed and that we're preserving all these residents. And they were talking about removing some material and doing some other earthwork, and we're like, no, I don't even think that's going to happen given how shallow some of these remains are, which is pretty surprising for everybody. Another thing that you may or may not be familiar with if you're in the area is Doane Academy. It's just kind of up the road a bit on the New Jersey side, Burlington. Doane Academy is a school, and we were actually doing geophysics nearby at an ammunition plant that used to be right next to this place. And I'm walking around using what looks like a lawnmower, and some guy came out to me and said, what are you doing? Just mowing, lawn mowing? And I'm like, oh no, I'm doing geophysics. And so he ended up being one of the history teachers and said, you need to come over here and take a look. And if you're looking at the image on the far right, the photo, this was the former Bishop Doane house. Was owned by the bishop, and forgive me, I forget which style of Gothic architecture, but it was a very specific, the first of its time. And unfortunately, in the 70s, Todd, and Lauren, you and I were talking this before they started this discussion. How sad it is that sometimes progress just literally steamrolls over things. And in this case, they needed more parking for the school, and this was bulldozed overnight. So talking to the historical society there and the teachers, we realized how important it was to try to preserve some of this information. So we conducted a geophysical study, very similar to what we did with Gloria Dei. And on the far left, you see a GPR cross-section, so a chop of all the data. And then we see where we have found all of these foundations and features and structures. And then we compare that to very, very old blueprints that we had, and we digitized them and overlaid them. And we took our data and overlaid it on top, and it was a very close match. This is now a project site for students where we give them different plots. And we say, I'm pretty sure you're going to see this here and a foundation here and this there. And they actually get to do their own archaeological dig and expose it and then evaluate it, which is pretty cool. And then lastly, I'll just show you another modern example where we're collecting that EM data I mentioned. We're walking back and forth and collecting soil connectivity data. And in this case of an existing cemetery, there was looks like a right-of-way or a pathway that they had, and they were evaluating for a small road and utilities. And we went out there to evaluate, and we suddenly found a lot of cultural remains with no headstones. So the archaeology team has their work to do there quite a bit. Okay, so I've gone over a lot, and I know it was very quickly and very preliminary, but I want to open this up to questions and give people opportunity to discuss. and what else we can even bring to the table. So for that, we'll open it up.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say thank you so much, Alex and Tom. That was absolutely amazing. A really in-depth look, literally in-depth look at
Put on the spot.
history. Yeah. At, comparing what people think is there and then finding the actual evidence. So that is absolutely phenomenal. Um, let's go over to the chat. Donald, I know that you had a very in-depth question slash you were sharing some knowledge with us about your family history. Do you feel that was answered in the presentation, or do you still have some additional questions, or do you want to share that with everyone? Not sure if Donald's still there. I think though the answer he was asking at the end of his summary there, the question was, so Peter is likely in the study area 2, given your information, but I think he actually would be in study area 3. Is that correct, Alex?
Yes, study
Okay.
three. Study 2 was what we think to be the area of the blockhouse, and that is due south of the church entrance doors. The nook, so we would call it the southwest nook of the footprint, is where the Rambo family currently resides. There's several headstones that are tied to that area, and we think that if you're looking plan view down at the family plot, to the most extreme right side or east side, very close to the existing footprint of the building, is where we suspect Rambo or Peter Rambo is residing.
Thank you for that clarification. He also appears to be looking for some of his ancestors as well. And yes, thank you. He's very excited about this project and will be continuing. Where can we track the progress of your work?
That's a great question. I think that's one thing that we want to start developing, because while we have the GIS app, it's a start, but it's just a kind of a generalized view of the whole site. Uh, Todd, Marilise, and I think are going to have to start looking at, as we go to visit to early this spring, once it dries out a bit, because it's been horrible weather. Uh, we're going to start developing kind of like a base grid system where we can, each plot we do, we're going to map it, and then we're going to say here's the new data that we're mapping, and then probably have some snippets of cross sections and other things. So I think what we'll do is, probably makes the most sense, is to develop something on our website that we can get a link for everybody to look at and see some of the progress. But Lauren, I think that may be something that we can discuss also with the church, with Amy, and maybe that's something we can put on their website too. And maybe quarterly we come up with some updates. And for everyone who's listening too, if you're interested in your family members or you have specific questions about the area, let's talk, because maybe we don't want to go the next block down, and so on. Maybe we need to move over to the far west side of the site. Maybe we need to start poking around there, and if we can help answer some questions, we'd love to do that.
It definitely looks like Donald has some specifics that he's looking for. Can you enter your best contact information for where you would like people to reach out to you about that too?
I will absolutely do that. Let me see if I could. Actually, Todd or Marilise, if you could start putting in some information, probably emails to start. I am stuck on the sharing screen at the moment.
I'm gonna ask Marilise can you include mine, Marilise, my cell phone and my email? I'm afraid if I touch something, I'll turn the whole thing off. I'm terrible with.
Yeah. We're good with geophysics and engineering,
Yeah.
but apparently when it comes to PowerPoints, yikes.
There should
That's
be
all
a
right.
stop share button on your screen,
Yeah,
Alex.
there it is. It's
There you
just
go.
hiding. Okay.
Great.
I
We'd
do.
also talked about, of course, in conjunction with Amy and the historic Gloria Dei Preservation Corporation, we're also happy to do periodic updates via programs like this, via Zoom as well, so we can all stay in touch and see what makes the most sense.
Absolutely.
I know Amy has done there are some things on the Preservation Corporation's website.
I put
Uh,
that up as well.
yeah, and so I think probably I wish Amy was here, because she's a very important part of this whole
Mm.
process and journey. Um, but it needs to be updated. But she had started some stuff about the GPR, trying to raise money, but yeah, things that need to be updated. So I think between what we can post on the Colors Engineering Design type our website, and then we'll do it in conjunction with Gloria Day, just to make sure we cover lots of bases, and then we'll work with the museum as well.
And I think it's probably about time also to consider an outreach with Drexel or one of the local universities, see if we can get a little momentum on their end. Because, like I said, a PhD, a student capstone project, anything related to technology, to surveying, to archaeology, anything that we can apply, it benefits both of us.
It was interesting during the 325th anniversary of the first worship service. I was sought out by multiple PhDs, and they wanted to see kind of where Peter was, or the potential remains of Peter, but they were mostly interested in that blockhouse. They wanted me
You
to
were
show
saying
them.
that.
Yeah, they were very interested. They said because there's been so much debate about exactly where that blockhouse was. They all, not all together, individually sought me out and said, "Can you show me where you think you found, the foundation line?" And it's that walkway. It's that brick path.
Mhm.
And that again goes along with the family lore of how many paces off the side door of the blockhouse that Peter was buried. That also helped tie in some of the family story.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm seeing some
Um,
awesome stuff in the chat, and,
mhm.
we're gonna make sure we review all this, and if we can get back the answers for everybody, we're absolutely gonna do that. Mary Lise, thank you for putting up our information, day
Thank
or
you.
night, like Todd said. We're available. So if we can help in any way, we would absolutely love to do so.
See, that's what we love about these programs is it really connects people with research, with what's happening today, and getting people answers for their families. So I love that about the programs. Does anyone, we just want to be conscious of time. Does anyone have any last minute questions that they'd like to ask? You can, again, feel free to unmute and converse. Lots of terrific programs. Thank you so much. Great.
I,
Yep.
I would like to, I didn't mention this up front, but if anybody on here, I mean, obviously, if you're on here because of Peter Rambo and you're a descendant, that's awesome. I'm always glad to meet cousins. But I didn't mention I'm descended from two people from the colony, Sven Scoot and Peter Rambo. So I actually have two 10th great grandfathers that were there at the founding of the new Swedish colony. So if there's any descendants of Sven Scoot and that line, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Wonderful. And we look forward to working more with you guys and especially Tom, maybe getting involved with our genealogy club here. We would
Absolutely.
love to hear from you in that capacity as well. All right, so while I wrap things up, I just again want to thank Amy Grant. I know she could not be here with us today live, but her work at Historic Gloria Dei has really enabled this whole entire project in partnership with you guys, and we really, really appreciate that we could facilitate this presentation on behalf of both of your organizations. So thank you again for allowing us to help to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up, next month's third Thursday lecture will be with our curator, Brett Peters, as he gives a behind the scenes look at our upcoming exhibition, From Taste to Tech, 100 Years of Nordic Innovation and Impact. Also, please don't forget to purchase tickets for our ABBA dance party this Saturday if you haven't already. And if you're interested in learning more about our upcoming programming, becoming an ASHM member, or ways to support the American Swedish Historical Museum during our 100th anniversary, please feel free to reach out to any of us here at the museum. I know we would love to hear from you and be able to connect you with more historic opportunities like this. So we'll leave it there. Thank you again, gentlemen, very, very much for your time and for this absolutely moving presentation. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Have a great weekend. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.